Hey everyone, welcome to this afternoon's webinar in the AMATYC 2021 webinar series, Globalizing Curriculums with Data, COIL Energizes the Learning Environment. Our presenters are Irene Duranchik, Grace Pai, and Shiro Witanachi. This is sponsored by the International Mathematics ANET and the Statistics Committee of AMATYC. Any views expressed by the presenters are not necessarily the views of AMATYC. Commercial products mentioned by presenters are not endorsed by AMATYC. McGraw-Hill is our sponsor for the 2021 AMATYC webinar series. If you would like to get more information or participate more in AMATYC, you can join. We do have a presence on Facebook. Okay? It keeps you up to date with information. Some other upcoming professional development opportunities. The plan is to have the regular conference in Phoenix later this year. The 2022 conference will be in Toronto. There are other webinars and traveling workshop opportunities throughout the year. And this webinar is being recorded. The materials and the recording will be shared later today or tomorrow and then posted on AMATYC's website very soon. So with that, I will now Okay, so allow me to introduce our three presenters. Irene Duranchik is an associate professor of the College of Education and Human Development at the University of Minnesota. Irene was co-principal investigator of the Algebra Instruction at Community Colleges, an exploration of its relationship with Student Success Project, NSF Award 1561436. She is presently a principal investigator of collaborative research, AI at CC, validating measures of quality instruction, NSF 2000-527. Irene began working with community colleges in Michigan in 1990 with funding from NSF and Eisenhower higher education grants. And Irene is an active member of AMATYC and MINMATYC. Grace Pai is an assistant professor of interdisciplinary studies and faculty coordinator of international education at Stella and Charles Gutman Community College in the City University of New York, CUNY. In addition to being a former Peace Corps volunteer and high school mathematics teacher in New York City, she worked as a senior research associate at the New York City Department of Education. She's an active member of AMATYC, including the Developmental Math Committee, and her research interests include post-secondary access and success, global learning, international development, and mathematics education. Shiro Witanachi is a lecturer of economics and business at Queen City College in the City University of New York. With a background in aerospace engineering, she transitioned from industry to academia. She draws on her experience of living abroad and 20 years of teaching to develop innovative curriculums through international alliances. In 2016, she was awarded the Diversity Enhancement Research Grant by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for her research on measuring the impact of internationalization on underrepresented students. Shiro is also bridging the application knowledge gap through her role as director of the Business and Liberal Arts program at Queens College. So I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pat. Between the three of us, we've used COIL to look at statistics in the College of Education, also in business and math departments. And so that's our experiential background, which we'll be talking to you about today. And we want to make sure that this next hour and a half is very productive for you and your growth and knowledge about COIL. And applies to your interests and goals. So make sure that you use the chat to become more specific in what your needs are. We probably will not be following the chat while we're speaking, but we do have set aside 20 minutes to be able to work with you on answering questions. And then we also have a Jamboard, which we will spend time with you. Next slide, Pat. So I already started to talk a bit about the agenda. So we started with the introductions, then we'll give you a brief overview of what COIL is, how to plan for COIL, and how to develop that faculty collaboration, then about the implementation of a COIL. Then we'll have that larger period, which I just discussed, of discussions, questions and answers. And so that would be where your specific questions would be very, very helpful to us. And you can identify them for one individual, or you can make it general, and we'll pop in as we know the answer to your question. Then we'll have the interactive Jamboard, which will give you an opportunity to start thinking about what you would like to do or what you're thinking about you'd like to do. And then we'll talk a little bit about how COIL extended into other aspects of our life or our university. Next slide. We're now going to have a few questions that we'd like you to respond to in a poll. And so Pat's going to make the poll available. And we would just like this feedback, which will give us understanding of where you're at and where we are as a group as we start forward.
So the first question, I guess I'll just say it out loud too.
Okay.
Right, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the lowest, 5 being the highest, how familiar would you say that you are with COIL or virtual exchange? So take a second to vote. And again, this is just so we can kind of also know who we're talking to and cater what we're doing to where you guys are all coming from. Okay, it's good to know and very exciting. And definitely, yes, hopefully you'll learn some new ideas today that you guys can implement. We are trying to make this also very practical.
Yes.
The second question, you guys want me to just keep reading those? Yeah, okay,
Sure.
So simple yes, no. Have you taught a COIL class before?
I'm going to assume that there'll be more no's than yeses.
Yep, I'm guessing from the previous question, but.
Yes.
Good guess there, Irene. 100%. Wonderful. And then, so yes, definitely today's session will be hopefully useful to all of you. And then finally, are you planning on teaching a COIL class in the near future? Right, so it sounds like most of you guys have not done COIL or know little about it. But do you think, I mean, obviously you'll learn more and you'll make that decision for real, whether you're going to do this. But on the outset, at least at the outset, do you plan on teaching a COIL class like next year?
We should have put this question at the end.
Yeah, that's true.
We can ask it again, I think.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
I can put it back up at the end of the webinar. Just remind me.
Great.
That could be our pre-post, guys.
Yes.
Oh,
okay.
Wonderful.
So we'll see what that looks like at the end then.
Great. Next slide, please. So we know that we're all dealing with this globalized world and this multicultural environment. And so we know that we need to prepare our students with additional skills, not just knowledge from course content. And if we look around, our society is already surrounded by opportunities, but these opportunities come with anxieties, they come with challenges. You know, we see communities experiencing tension related to security, prejudice, economic uncertainty. So that means that we need to prepare our students with additional skills, not just knowledge from course content, and not just the how-tos of conducting statistics or how to do linear algebra. Students need to know how to communicate data effectively to a multicultural audience. And just because a campus is diverse or has a diverse student body like we do in New York, it doesn't necessarily mean that students are learning from each other. It does mean that they have, it does not mean that they have gained these automatic intercultural skills. So something more concrete or formal needs to take place to help guide them and enhance their competencies and oral communication skills. So COIL does just that, and COIL falls under this umbrella of virtual exchange. So when you look at this visual here, virtual exchange is at the center, and it's a practice that consists of technology-enabled sort of people-to-people education programs in which people can interact from various locations and from various cultural backgrounds. So there are many models to this virtual exchange, and COIL is one of them. The models are telecollaboration, globally networked learning. So COIL is a term that was coined by the State University of New York. It emphasizes collaboration. COIL really focuses on global learning. So if you think of global learning as the process of diverse people collaboratively analyzing and addressing complex problems across borders, then COIL does just that. And COIL even extends this to giving students international experiences, students and faculty really, through this collaborative, international, intercultural exchange. And all this is happening while supporting content knowledge and these career skills that they're gaining. And I also have to mention that many colleges have switched to online teaching with this pandemic. So virtual exchange, or COIL, has become even more feasible as an important means to sort of invigorate this idea of global learning and connection. So physical distance does not prohibit instructors and students from gaining these skills. And I think Grace is going to explain a little bit more about COIL. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Chiro. So yeah, more specifically, so what is COIL, which again stands for Collaborative Online International Learning, and how does it work? Right, and COIL happens when faculty from different countries or cultures, because you can actually also do a domestic COIL, it doesn't have to be international, when faculty collaborate on designing a course module and they embed it into an existing credit-bearing course. And it's important here to stress that you're not designing a new course that you have to get approved through your college council or curriculum committee. So instead, think of it as you're co-creating an assignment or a module for an existing course, such as course A, which you see in the diagram there. And you're doing this with a faculty partner who is teaching a course X that exists at their institution. The two of you might be teaching in completely different disciplines even, but you work together to design and develop a COIL module in which students taking their respective course A or course X at their institution, they engage in discussions and collaborate on scaffolded activities or a project. And they can do so by using synchronous and or asynchronous online tools. So students, from a student's perspective, right, they're getting the credits that they would usually get anyway, and not getting credit for a separate COIL course in and of itself. That's often a misconception that people have of COIL. So it's more of a course module than a course. Next slide, please, Pat. There's many ways that a COIL module can look, but they're typically 5 to 12 weeks in length. And a classic design is to begin with an icebreaker where students first build community and develop trust. This can be done, or this can then be followed by an introduction to the project and perhaps having comparative discussions on the project's theme. So next, a critical component of every COIL module is to make sure that you have a collaborative assignment, which is at the heart of what makes this an invaluable experiential learning opportunity for students. Because now, right now, they have the chance to apply their disciplinary as well as their cultural knowledge to have a real world context of working with international peers. And ideally, this collaborative assignment, it should be an interdependent one, where students must not only work together, for example, to solve a problem, but they have to go further than that to actually learn from each other. So they're not just Googling some facts about their partner's cultures or traditions or heritage and then copy pasting that into some presentation and calling that a collaborative cross-cultural project. And then finally, typically you want to conclude the COIL module with some type of culminating event presentation as well as individual reflection. Shiro and Irene are going to talk next about the benefits of COILing for faculty as well as for students.
Next slide, please. So there are many benefits to faculty with implementing COIL in a course. When we look at high impact educational practice, now there are many pedagogical practices that have been shown to be beneficial to students and their learning. And they can take many forms, right? We've heard of first-year seminars, writing intensive courses, undergraduate research, service learning, learning communities. So COIL can be considered this high-impact teaching practice. For example, administrators may support faculty to implement a COIL module, and this can be done through training and workshops. And then this could result in possible release time. It's valued when it's reappointment, tenure, promotion time. Building connections with international faculty partners across disciplines. So COIL, this COIL module also connects faculty around the globe, right? And across disciplines. So like Grace mentioned, there are many different models for COIL. You know, I have to say that although we tend to traditionally look for a partner within our own academic discipline, it's so much more unique, and the insights are so refreshing when you're creating these connections across disciplines. So that's something to think about. Of course, by implementing a COIL module, you're also incorporating your institution's international goals. You are showcasing your college on the international platform. Once you begin communicating with faculty with different socio and cultural norms, we advance our own skills, our own intercultural communication skills. We learn whether, you know, I'll give you a quick example. This past week, I learned that certain cultures feel very strongly about where they place their flag, or how disrespectful it could be to look you in the eye. So these are things that we're learning ourselves, not only our students. Developing an integrative approach to scholarship. So of course, scholarship is important, and how fantastic to be able to co-author with an international faculty partner. And finally, it's fun. It's a fun way to teach. It's very effective to increase student interest. Next slide, please.
Okay, in addition to the benefits that you and your institution will garner, COIL is a great way to model the learning process and extend students' ability to integrate their academic knowledge and skills with their personal career and life goals. My course grew out of a project to a service learning unit to a COIL unit. The additional hidden benefits of COIL to students, seeing how math statistics can enrich their life, as they are not just learning math techniques and skills, but these skills are embedded in a project, a process to enrich their intercultural communication skills and help them envision their place in a globalized world. They move out of silo thinking into more integrative thinking. They find the intersection of data and global partners and make the math or the statistics come alive, become more interesting for them. In my last class, it was the first time in my career, and I've been around the block a few times, that I had perfect attendance. And I think it was because of the COIL. This was during the pandemic, and it was with the COIL. It was an intercultural, it was the intercultural interaction and the use of real data around student interests that really made the difference. Next slide.
Great. So hopefully by now we've intrigued at least some of you to consider trying COIL in your teaching. We'll get back to that question at the end again, but let's keep going. So no matter what you teach, and even if you're new or old to COIL, the process begins with doing some brainstorming around what course you want to COIL in and who you might want to partner with. Before I even talk about which school and course I ultimately partnered with, I'll first share some key decision points from my own brainstorming process. So I teach various math courses at my college, ranging from statistics to quantitative reasoning to college algebra and trigonometry. I don't know about you all, but teaching a subject like math, I often struggle with covering all of the content standards and the skills. So, and it's true, doing something like COIL will take a little bit of class time away from your normal instruction, where in the asynchronous world of online teaching, or synchronous world of online teaching, it will add some activities to your course design. So I first looked for a course that has a little more wiggle room in terms of the pacing and the content breadth. I then looked at the syllabi from each course, as well as, obviously my teaching schedule. And then I decided that a developmental stats course, which I sometimes teach, would be the best course for me to COIL in, since 15% of the course grade is based on a semester project that is of the faculty's choice in design. And that course schedule is also not as tight as, say, a course like college algebra and trig. So then after deciding on stats, I also thought of our college's mission and strategic plan. So our college, we're a designated Hispanic serving institution, HSI, and we've been active in the past years in moving from simply being a Hispanic enrolling institution to being a true Hispanic serving institution. So this led me to want to find a partner in a Spanish-speaking country, since 60% of our students identify as Latinx. I then wrote up a profile, which I put on various platforms like Unit Collaboration and WCIGC. We're happy to share some of those resources with you guys later if you'd like. I also used that profile as the basis for an email that I sent out both to my network of people that I already know, as well as cold emails to universities that I found online who are active in COIL work. And that's how I ended up pairing with a professor from Universidad del Caribe in Cancun, Mexico, who was teaching a course on talk about interdisciplinary, teaching a course on marketing for gastronomy majors, completely different than statistics. More to come on my partnership later, but for now, I'm going to pass it back to Irene.
Okay, and I started in a different direction. I started working with a woman from Siberia, Chita, Russia, just on other kind of ideas and projects. She was visiting the United States. I had visited Russia. And so we kind of knew each other. She taught in a school of pedagogy in Chita. And over the years that I've known her, she changed to another institution and was then teaching English as a second language and teaching statistics. Not statistics, she was teaching economics. And I had a project in my class and she had a project in her economics class. And one unit in her economics was understanding the American economic system. And we then built a project around that with the project I had in my class with its requirements, and the project that she had in her class with its requirements. And so I started with an individual that I knew, and then we worked together to develop it. And then through a faculty member at her institution, because Southern Siberian is very close to China, we also then developed a relationship with a Chinese faculty member. And for students in Russia, Russia is their first language, China's their second, Chinese is their second language, and English is their third language. And so we decided that the group of us could work together on a project. It takes about 9 months to go through this brainstorming, of course, and finding partners at a minimum. So if you're thinking for next year of doing a COIL, right now is really the time to do some of the work that Grace started to do, or to go back through your network and see what you would like to do.
So,
and yes,
yeah.
Go ahead.
I teach a statistics course as well. And last spring, yes, in the middle of the pandemic, I connected my students with Hague University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands. And I did this with a faculty from the management and organization department at their university. So her students were from various ethnicities. Some were Dutch, some were Vietnamese, Lithuanian, and they were of different majors, interdisciplinary majors, taking a course in journalism and media. And I found this faculty partner through the Academy of International Business conference that I attended. There was a workshop on teaching, and she also presented an article on a virtual exchange project. So I reached out and connected with her. So I guess the moral of the story is you can find a faculty partner in the most unlikely places. And today, we'll be giving you an example of how our students collaborated. Next slide, please.
Okay, getting to know your partner. And this lists some of the things that you need to consider as you're looking at your partner. Comparing academic calendars and course schedules. Not every country, not even everybody within the same country follows the same academic calendar, including holidays, national days, national testing days, and those kind of things. And also course schedules. I have found that in the fall is the best time to do collaborations with China because our two course calendars somewhat line up. It's nearly impossible to line up schedules with China in the spring semester because their semester starts in March or early April, and it goes then through July, and most of our semesters end in April. And so just getting to know what that academic calendar looks like is a very important thing to do. The next one is time difference. Again, I was dealing with people with quite a bit of a time difference, and I have done COIL both asynchronously and synchronously. And I have found if I set my class for an evening class, which lines up with a morning class in Russia and China, it is a much more effective class than if I'm setting my class up in the morning. It's in the middle of the night in Russia and China, and everything needs to be done asynchronously. So you need to take a look at different time and then how that daylight saving time changes throughout the semester. And that also has an impact on how you will need to do your scheduling. The next thing, of course, is your college context, whether you and your partner need to know anything about the nuances that may impact the ease or be sensitive in the relationship between your countries. I had put a bunch of information together about becoming global citizens, only to find out that term in itself was not a friendly term for my colleagues in China. They could talk about being national citizens in a globalized world, but not being global citizens. And so making sure your language in the college context that you have is working. Are both campuses open access, diverse? Their residential setting, the size of the college, the age of the students, all those things will have an impact on how you're setting up your relationship. And then will all the partners get support from their university or their college context to operate within this context? Because if that's not equal, one person will keep on getting blowback in their institution. Class size is another thing that's very important to consider, because if you have a class of 130 and your counterpart has a class of 25, how are those differences going to be dealt with and discussed ahead of time? Whether or how that will impact your program. And I think now I'll turn it over to Shiro.
So continuing with how to get to know your partner, the next thing is discussing the type of technology, available to you and both sets of students. So you need to discuss Wi-Fi capabilities, what your institution's guidelines are on sharing cloud space for large files. Also, which social media is preferred, or do you even want your students to use social media while they're connecting and engaging during your course? How do you want students to communicate? Do you want this done synchronously, asynchronously? Would you be using a course learning management site that will be shared? So these are discussions that are important, and it really should be done during the months before you actually roll out the module in your course. The other thing is your philosophy of teaching and learning. I found that discussing your teaching philosophy is really important. Share your beliefs and thoughts about what's important to you in teaching. And it's interesting as like a self-evaluation, how do you implement those teaching beliefs in your courses? Has your teaching practice evolved? What have you done to maybe enhance your teaching practices? What new innovations have you incorporated into your teaching? Is that something you would like to share with your faculty partner? And then academic content and other international goals for the collaboration. Have this discussion and have it early. Maybe you want to state from the very start that your goal is to submit an article for a particular journal. Then you need to start this discussion early. And you need to have IRB approval for data collection. So at the end of today's webinar, we're going to share a few documents with you, and we'll also share a set of questions that I find useful when I'm collaborating, when I'm planning a collaboration with a partner. So it's good to have an open discussion on what your various expectations are. Next slide, please.
All right, gosh, I hope we didn't scare you off with all those things that you have to do. And that's why, to go back to Irene's point earlier about it taking 9 months, I think you said, Irene, it didn't take me 9, I would say more like 4 to 6, like 6 broadly, but 4 more intensive. But much of that was what we just said previously, like all the back and forth discussing I had, both through email as well as live Skype calls with my partner about those little nitty gritty details. So that's why it takes time. So, okay, back to this. So you've brainstormed what course you want to COIL in, you found a partner, and you've gotten to know your partner. What's next? Now is the fun part of actually designing your COIL module with your partner. So we're each going to share our experience doing that. But first, to continue where I left off. So after I identified and got to know my partner, we decided on a COIL module that was originally supposed to be 5 weeks in length, but we had to pivot and change it to 6 weeks since I too was teaching this last spring during the height of the pandemic. My module was comprised of an icebreaker where students individually posted a video introducing themselves, followed by community building through commenting on each other's posts and getting to know their assigned international team members. They then conducted a collaborative project in these international teams, and then the module culminated with a live session where students presented their course projects to one another. I'm going to return to these activities later on in more depth, but all in all, we had 1 synchronous Zoom meeting and 3 rounds of asynchronous social media exchanges. And then for the technology piece, my partner and I, we wanted to use a platform that was the most common to both of our student populations and one that would impose yet another learning barrier to students or add to students' already existing technology fatigue with all the various apps, and different accounts that they have to have these days. So we settled on a private Facebook group for asynchronous communication, as well as WhatsApp and emails for their own team communications, and then Zoom for our live sessions. And then finally, right, and an important and sometimes overlooked component that I find critical to a successful COIL module is actually the grading, right? And making sure that the COIL work that students do is a significant part of the course and not just a small activity. So this heavily does influence students' buy-in and shows your own value for this type of learning. And for me, the semester project, which is 15% of their total course grade, was completely contingent on students successfully completing the COIL module. Irene, I'll turn it to you to share your COIL module.
Yes, and so the duration I've done, and I think I've done 4 COILs at this point in time, has been anywhere from 5 weeks to 8 weeks, depending again on how the semesters line up and the holidays and the other kind of things that line up. The project that I have students do, they work with another partner in another country for that project, but that project in statistics, they have to do a statistical test at the end, and that statistical test may not come up to the end of the semester. And so even though the project that they're working with whether it be doing a survey or collecting data from some internet source, that part they're doing collaboratively, but the final end of their project is something that they're doing individually because the students in let's say Russia, for example, it's for an economics class. They're not doing a statistical test at the end. They're making a report on some policy of the United States economic system. So parts are from 4 to 8 weeks, but the project is a kind of like a semester project. The module activities, we've started off usually with students doing a picture of themselves, telling about themselves, their academic goals, their career goals, their just hobbies and interests, and what aspect of whatever the topic is for that semester that they're most interested in, that they'd like to partner with somebody else with. Then we go into some pre-planning sessions and do some pre-grouping of students based on their interests. And then they do have this, in Russia, they have an oral report. Here they do a paper. And many of those things are asynchronous, but we always have asynchronous opportunities. And since I started teaching my class in the evening, it's worked out very much better because we can set up a Zoom and we can set up then rooms in the Zoom, and people can work on their projects in real time during class time, and it makes the whole process work much smoother. Technology has been another challenge because every country has different limits on what technologies are useful. And in China, as you may know or not know, that Google is not a product that they honor. And so we have to use other tools to move around. Same thing with Facebook, it's not a tool that could be used there. So that also becomes part of the discussion with your partner of what kind of tools you're going to use. And as Shiro mentioned earlier, we've finally found a Yandex, like a Google platform where we could put films and bigger projects that couldn't be sent by email between one another. And of course, Zoom, with their translation service, is absolutely excellent if you're doing it in 2 different languages. And grade, again, a very, very important thing. I did it one semester without a grade on one end and a grade on the other end, and it doesn't work as smoothly as if everybody has a grade for participating in the project. Shira?
So I can tell you about the statistics course that I taught, and the example I'm going to give you today is what happened in the spring of 2020, last year. So these are economic students taking a statistics course. And I think, as Grace mentioned, when you're teaching a math or a statistics course, there's a lot of content that we need to cover. So I felt that 4 weeks was enough time for students to strongly engage and collaborate on a project. The first week, they introduced themselves through this introductory video. And then in the second week, they decided on a topic that they selected from one of the 17 United Nations Sustainable Goals. And they did this as a team. So the team consisted of students from both campuses, and they picked their own topics. So topics included sustainable living, child poverty, and of course, since the assignment took place just when the COVID-19 crisis started, there were many reports about the pandemic and its impact on the economy. The third week, the teams collected the data. So my students, being economic students, had to choose this explanatory variable and the response variable based on published data from valid secondary sources. And the students from the Netherlands, since they were journalism students, they interviewed my Queen's College students about their quantitative data and about their opinions, and then wrote a journalistic article about the issue. The fourth week, students discussed the economic implications of the relationship of these 2 variables. They discussed their perspectives and their experiences of their international teams in relation to the topic that they had chosen. Students also discussed all these issues while referencing their own languages, their sociocultural and educational backgrounds. So it was interesting to hear that during these discussions, the Netherlands students had to take a different approach when they were working with students from the United States. For example, they asked themselves how much should they share initially. Students commented that the American students were ready to share a lot more initially, and they seemed, and the Dutch students, on the other hand, were more reserved with their peers. But once they built up a friendship, they seemed to be more open. Also, practically, students had to decide which channels of communication to use. Even with email and WhatsApp, there was different etiquette, and it varied greatly from culture to culture. Several students mentioned that when they were working on a common assignment, they felt closer to their partners, and it almost bridged their differences. They said some of the biggest challenges was scheduling meetings because of the time differences and the busy schedules. Of course, the pandemic heightened these difficulties in making and respecting these appointments. In my course particularly, there was a silver lining to doing this COIL project during the pandemic. One of my students was an international student, and she had to return to her home in Stockholm in Sweden. And in spite of this sudden shift to online learning last spring, she was able to complete the COIL assignment. And not only that, she ended up providing support to her peers who had been affected by the virus. And she did this through WhatsApp. So suddenly collaborating with peers abroad was almost necessary. It was essential. And I think Grace and Irene both mentioned that grading is very important when you're introducing a COIL module to your course. I had 20% of the grade set aside. So 10% was the report that they had written and 10% was the engagement. Next slide, please.
All right, so finally, before you actually implement the virtual exchange, so remember we're still right now walking you guys through the phase of what the faculty collaboration looks like before you actually then implement in the course, and then what the student perspective is. So before you implement the virtual exchange, right, the final thing you want to do is to ensure that you and your partner have agreed upon how you want to assess student learning. So common assessment approach for COIL is to conduct a mixed methods assessment of students' global competencies, where you conduct quantitative assessment of pre-post surveys, and you can use pre-existing inventories like the IDI, which I believe, Irene, I think you guys used at UMN.
Yes.
Right, and then you can combine that with qualitative assessment of artifacts like reflection papers, open-ended questions to those surveys, or even entire student portfolios. And again, there you can use available rubrics such as AAC and U. They have value rubrics on global learning and intercultural competence. And you can use those to qualitatively assess student learning. But what I find even more important than the actual instruments is to make sure that you're assessing against the framework. So there's a lot out there, including there's another one, Global Perspective Inventory, the GPI, the IDI that I just mentioned, but a lot of them are costly. So what we did at our college, I led efforts at my college to create a culturally responsive framework that draws on existing models, but relates it to our student population's needs. So for example, we have a large percentage of English language learners, and I wanted a model that was more student-facing and student-friendly. Particularly, I wanted language that all students can actually comprehend and remember when they see it. So our model assesses, you see it on the left there, it assesses 4 main dimensions: students' global mindsets, global communication, global thinking, and global action. So from a student's perspective, do you believe globally? Do you communicate globally? Do you think globally? And do you act globally? Once you have that framework, and I'm going to say this especially to a AMATYC crowd who probably likes to geek out on quantitative analysis, and you guys, I'm sure, already know this, but then you can do what you want to make sure is that whatever survey questions you end up using or designing, that they are mapped to those dimensions so that when you do analysis of your pre-post survey, you can make better sense of that data. Next slide, please, Pat. Thank you. Great. So we're going to now walk you through what the collaboration looks like from a faculty's perspective, or I mean, from a student's perspective instead of faculty's perspective. So as I previously mentioned, so I'm going to go first and just go a little more in detail, I already previewed some of that to you. But as I previously mentioned, I leveraged modifying the semester project as the key strategy to implementing COIL in my course. So I, in part, framed the COIL module to students as a scaffolded project that they were conducting over the course of the semester. At the beginning of the semester, you see it on the right-hand side, that's kind of the outline of what the activities are. So at the beginning of the semester, I gave them a pre-survey, which I actually embedded in the Getting to Know You survey that I always administer in any class that I teach anyway. And then the first week of the module, which for me was the third week of the actual course, I generally introduced students to the project, and then they had that week to post an introductory video of themselves and answering a lot of the questions that like Irene shared earlier, but also just, you know, a day in your life, posting that in your video into our Facebook private group. And then the A's in there denote asynchronous activities as opposed to S for the synchronous. And then on a quick side tech note, if anyone does plan on using Facebook for this, the way we specifically use Facebook was to program each module activity as an event. So it would be organized in the group as opposed to just like a long stream of Facebook posts. Then the following week, we spent a class session exploring the theme and the project guidelines. I've always assigned the survey project similar to what both Irene and Shiro talked about too. But yeah, so I've always assigned a survey project anyway as part of my stats class. And all I did for this collaboration was to constrain students to the topic of food in order to parallel our partner gastronomy students in Mexico. So students could create any survey research project on a topic related to studying food. And I guided students in developing research topics related to that common project theme. So for example, one group did a project studying the relationship of COVID and food. Another studied college students' takeout habits. And another studied how health conscious New Yorkers were. And then additionally, we did take time from the class where I introduced students to global and intercultural competencies and its importance in the real world. So one of the dimensions on the global learning assessment framework that I previously introduced for us is global thinking, which we at our college define as knowledge of other cultures and contexts, and the ability to adopt other perspectives to analyze global issues in relations to oneself. So you have to start with the self. So that's why I had my students share their own cultural backgrounds, identities, and values before discussing what they knew about their partner city and country of Cancun, Mexico. So then after that, I assigned them to international teams, and they had 2 weeks to collaborate on a cross-cultural comparative project where they compared and contrasted each other's hometowns as well as experiences of COVID and the pandemic in light of the time. This was another asynchronous activity where they posted their slides or videos in the group and then had to comment on each other's group submissions. And then the module culminated in a synchronous live session where students presented their course projects to each other. So my students presented their statistics projects, right, with the hypothesis test, with like descriptive stats, and the UC students presented their marketing proposals for local small restaurants in Cancun. So there was a bit of a difference there. But they still, had to give each other feedback, and they also posted their presentations to our Facebook group, and again, commented on each other's work. And one more note I'll say on that, even though that might seem almost jarring, the way I stressed it to students, emphasized it to students, is that part of statistics, you really have to be able to also translate to a general audience, right? So that's the way I framed why are you presenting to, a group of students who are not taking statistics and might not be knowledgeable about it at all. And then finally, I didn't actually have my students do this until the end of the semester, which is a few weeks after the COIL module ended for me. But then they completed the post survey and the final written reflection at the end of the course. So what were some of the students' reflections at the end of the semester for me? One of my students said, this is going to be a long quote, so bear with me. My perspective on the world has changed due to experiencing and hearing about the different ways people all over the world complete a task. During this project, one new thing I had to adapt to was contacting students from another country. This made me realize how time zones may be different. This also opened up my eyes to realizing how their ways of learning are completely different from ours. And this is what moved me the most. This project has changed my view on my own heritage by wanting to explore more about my own background. And this is feedback I would rarely, if ever, get in a math course, which highlights again the potential for helping students grow in different ways, even in a math class where you usually are just focused on covering content. On the flip side, a student from Mexico said, well, I changed my way of thinking just a little. It was not the best experience as a team because we had problems, but my team tried to solve it. And that's real. you're likely going to have some students who might find this challenging and might even complain about it. And that's another area that I think you do have to prepare for, to be able to tell them why persisting through these challenges is a form of professional development that is actually preparing them to be more competitive in a global world and economy, like Shiro has been stressing. And a couple more things. So as someone who teaches math and stats, right, I love quantitative survey results. So using our assessment framework, I was very intrigued by the fact that Gutman students experience, this is what you see in the middle there of the slide. And sorry, I had to format the slide this way. It was the only way to get everything to fit on one slide. But in the middle, you see our assessment, the quantitative assessment results. So I was personally very intrigued by the fact that Gutman students experience the largest average growth in verbal and oral communication skills, right? It's the deepest shade of red in the left column, compared to greater growth in cultural adaptation skills as reported by the UC students. And then an area on both sides that leaves more room for growth is global action, as exemplified by social responsibility. So that gives me, as an instructor, some ideas too of how I can further improve upon my COIL curricula in the future. So for me, to conclude, I just want to say that this is a practice that really has breathed fresh and new life into my teaching. And I've been teaching almost 20 years at this point. I know I look young, but it's a lot of work. And especially if you're new to it, but what I will say is that it is a high impact practice that is well worth the reward, right? It has been for me. And I didn't put it up here, but 2 students who historically have not liked math or done well in math classes informally told me afterwards that they never thought they would meet and work with students from Cancun in a math class, right? And for me, I took that as one of the biggest teaching compliments that I've received. So with that, I'm gonna pass it to Irene to talk more about her COIL module.
Next slide. Great. Thank you, Grace. So from a student perspective, I'll start out with a comment that I received from a student at the end of the class, which basically said, I felt like I had experienced a deeper cultural understanding for others that I could take with me for the rest of my life, whether it was an interaction on the street or an instance inside of the workplace. I am very thankful for this class for that. And you'll see at the bottom of this slide, the intercultural development continuum. It doesn't look like it might be large enough to see, but it shows you the growth of students over the semester on the IDI and intercultural understanding. We see also there the picture from Cheetah, from Shenyang, China, and from the university, that we all have different kind of setups in order to communicate when we're working in a group. And each of the schools at the beginning of the semester, the students wanted to do a short video just on what their campus was like, because they realized the campuses were quite different in size and in scope. And so each of the groups of students did on a weekend just put together a little 3-minute video of their campus, showing their dorm rooms, the city they were in, and just some background information to give context to students, and the student introductions. The other thing that I think was most helpful in the implementation of COIL is making it very much student-centered. So students are making the final decisions, and with faculty, then it is important that for me, that I'm working with faculty members that also are trying to implement a student-centered project, so that we can tweak the course and the projects to meet the students' needs, so they're seeing the curriculum advance their interests and goals as opposed to my interests and goals, even though we have some shared interests and goals in whatever the statistics course is offering, but it's built around a topic of interest to them and to their partner. The students were also very interested. The students put a presentation at the end of the semester to the college campus on what they did in a COIL, at a COIL kind of workshop at the campus, and thought it was very important to even just kind of center to see where Cheetah, Russia, and Shenyang, China are, so that people looking at it get a sense of where we are in the United States and how far away that is from their partners and how they were able to make it work. Shiro?
Yes, next slide, please.
Yes.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, the project lasted for about 4 weeks. They introduced themselves through this introductory video the first week and discussed the day and the time to schedule these online discussions. And this happened outside of class. Then they decided on a topic and started collecting data. Around the third week, they discussed their results and shared perspectives, experiences in relation to the topic, and discussed the economic implications of the relationship of the variables. The fourth week, they specified recommendations, and they completed this post-survey that I also had them take. Now, the surveys were interesting because I focused on their career skills that they were gaining. So I was working on a different project at the time, and I wanted to see whether COIL actually benefited and enhanced their competency skills. So I found that as students became more comfortable in their teams, they gained oral communication skills and they were able to interact respectfully with all people. And a couple of my students distinctly told me that they were able to talk about this project during their interviews. And one of the students impressed the interviewer so much that she was hired because of the COIL project. And, you know, that's something that means a lot. And I have a little video that I would like to share. Whenever you're ready, Pat, I think you can press play and maybe expand it.
Hi, my name's Tamar Haruni. I'm a sophomore at Queens College. I'm double majoring in finance and economics. I really enjoy cooking, baking, swimming, and dancing in my free time. And yeah, I'm a student in Queens College.
Hi guys, my name is Demi.
Hi guys, I'm Alex.
And we're both students from the Hague University in the Netherlands.
At first, everybody was kind of just agreeing with each other because they were afraid to speak out about their opinion. But afterwards, people were getting into like a deep conversation, and I thought it was really interesting.
It was definitely eye-opening to see that I'm so privileged to be living in a place where I can just come into school and go onto a computer with no issue. And speaking to somebody like that, you know, it really just opened my eyes to how much greater issues there are other than, you know, a computer not working for a few hours.
It taught me to be really careful about my word choice and the assumptions I make when I meet people from different countries. And it also gave me the valuable skill of working on an international team.
Thank you, Pat. So you can click again. I'm just going to leave you with these statements from my students for you to read. I think if you click, it should come up. I think we're waiting for Pat to share the slides again. Perfect. Yep, that's
There
good.
they are.
Yeah. So this is from the survey, and it was really insightful to read their reflections. And who would have thought, right? A math course or a statistics course would produce this sort of reflection. And I think we're ready to go to the next slide, which is Q&A.
Yeah, and since this is a webinar, we're asking you guys to just type your questions. And it can also just be comments. Like, oh my goodness, so much work. Yeah, maybe next year, maybe in 3 years I'll try this. Or like, I'm so excited. Wow, gonna try this, in the fall or spring.
Our intention was not to scare.
So we'd love any questions or comments. Again, type it into the chat box, and then we can take those.
We can also do the Jamboard.
Yeah. Let's see.
I just added into the chat a example of a project in a format that one could take a look at in more detail if you would like to. And I'm also going to add into the chat there an example of the pre-planning document that the University of Minnesota uses.
I can answer the question in the chat. There's a question about what type of support did you receive from your college? So I started by going to my dean and explaining this idea that I had to collaborate with an international partner. And my dean was very supportive and suggested that I meet with my Center for Teaching and Learning. And today I'm the coordinator of COIL on my campus. So I guess it started small, where I said, this is what I would like to initiate. And I discussed this with my chair. And we were able to get some funds where now we actually provide stipends to faculty who implement this into their course. So that's the type of support that we're giving faculty as incentive and motivation. Sometimes you're able to have some sort of partial course release time. So these are discussions that you can have with your chair and your dean. And, again, going back to the beginning, these are high impact education practices, which is beneficial to you, your students, and the institution.
I just want to mention that the first time I taught a COIL course, it was not listed in the course catalog as a COIL course. So I made the COIL aspect of the project a optional statistical project. You could choose a COIL statistical project, a service learning statistical project, or you could do a project just on your own. Again, different guidelines or similar guidelines for each, but I gave students the choice because when students had signed up for the class, they had not signed up knowing that there would be a COIL embedded in it. And that's another aspect that one needs to think about, particularly with that pre-planning. If you can't advertise your course with COIL in it, there may be holdbacks for students wanting to participate.
And I guess conversely, I might share a different experience where I guess to put it informally, I just kind of went rogue and just did it with very little institutional support. People knew I was doing it, and a lot of people I have met through the COIL network have taken a much more grassroots approach, especially if you do have someone who is, right, like that you already know, who, you can just kind of dive right in into getting to like talk about some of those logistics. But yeah, so like at our college, we don't get any formal institutional support for it. it's something that I'm trying to change, obviously. And then like on the CUNY side, right, we've been kind of also banding together, forming a working group and trying to institutionalize it more, like doing advocacy work, essentially, it feels like, both at like our own college campuses as well as at the university level. So that's definitely something where it's very much a community practice. And those of you guys who do get interested in this and want to join that community, it would be wonderful. It would be wonderful to definitely all network together and try to really, I mean, I do feel like in the last year in particular, it has changed into a movement.